Hello, everybody. Tonight, I'm going to talk about the case that's working its way through the courts called Missouri versus Biden. And I think it's one of the most important court cases that we have seen in our lifetimes. It's a big deal.
Yes.
We've been talking about, we've seen witnessed over the last few years and even longer government abuses, and nobody's ever held accountable. And just off the top of my head today, I put together a list of some of this stuff that just should never take place in a free society. You have the NSA spying on American citizens. That's not okay. We had the FBI with FISA abuse. Nobody's held accountable.
What's FISA abuse?
That was the Foreign Surveillance Court. It's basically how when
Foreign intelligence
surveillance court, basically a way of them to do warrantless, without a warrant. They basically the FBI is able to say, oh, we think this guy may be guilty, so we're going to spy and invade every single bit of his privacy whatsoever and take away all of his Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights, what have you. It's a big deal. Nobody's ever held accountable. These people, they're caught. We've got the documentation. They're caught red-handed. And I'll get to the point of that. But we had CIA for decades experimenting on American citizens. I don't even have to tell you the list of all these operations and stuff like that. They never got held accountable. The entire national health system versus COVID lied to the American public. Who's being held accountable? Yeah, Hillary's server. Comey just dismissed her. Uranium One selling, our nuclear secrets to foreign powers. Spygate. I'll phrase this delicately and say questionable elections. Black Lives Matter riots that were being funded by who?
Marxists.
Of course, yeah, but nobody's ever held accountable. Period. None of the institutions would touch these things.
It's treason though, and it should be held as that.
Of course it is, and that's what we're going to talk about.
Okay.
That's what we're talking about today.
Oh.
I'm setting the stage.
Okay, sorry.
You jump to the conclusion. I said the Black Lives Matter riots, Antifa, etc. Politicians doing insider trading. Caught red-handed dozens of times. Does anybody go to jail? Anybody ever get reprimanded? We had the FBI use of confidential human sources to entrap citizens. They've been doing this stuff for decades, definitely since 9/11. Fast and Furious. Nobody got held accountable. This is basically the United States government, our Attorney General, running guns to Mexico, where the cartels are not only killing American citizens with guns, but also with fentanyl and other drugs. Nobody got held accountable. Weapons of mass destruction, one of the biggest lies of all time that cost us taxpayers billions and billions of dollars.
Isn't it in the trillions?
Probably. We're probably getting there. The Afghanistan pullout disaster. Did anybody get fired?
No.
January 6th persecutions. These people being held illegally. There's no fast and speedy trial, jury of the peers, even though we had a couple of acquittals.
I read that they had another 1,000 they haven't arrested yet.
They're saying that, but we'll see what happens there. And then the entire Hunter Biden saga with the laptop, what have you. At what point do these people actually get held accountable? And this is all factual, documented stuff that we know that the government has done to us. They've broken the law and nobody holds them accountable, and there's a reason for it. And I've been asking this question on a lot of the different shows that we do and different conversations. What institution out there has the authority to hold these people accountable, and more importantly, has the will to do so?
Only God at this juncture.
No,
The self-regulating federal government.
the federal government's not going to rein itself in.
Yeah.
No.
Hey, can I add to that list or ask a question? Are you aware of any federal officers who've been arrested for violating suspect or arrestee's rights? The way that local municipal officers are held accountable if they handle somebody too roughly or violate civil rights? I can't think of any case where they have. I know on January 6th, the federal officer at the Capitol shot the lady, and it's clearly she was unarmed, and if that had been a local municipal officer, he would have been tried for murder.
Yeah,
I
sure.
can think of the Randy Weaver case where his wife was assassinated by an FBI sharpshooter while she was holding an infant. Nothing ever came to any of them.
Yeah, I think occasionally some of these people have been held accountable, but it's very rare, and it's an issue. If you are part of the ruling class or the administrative state, the law doesn't apply to you, and that you cannot have a free and civil society without that. So what's the solution? This is a problem. Well, there is an institution out there that actually has not only the authority, but occasionally the will to push back against this ridiculous federal government intrusion on our rights.
Can I take a stab at it?
Go ahead.
DIA, the intelligence.
Nope.
I think it's-
No, but I know where you're going with that. That's not where I'm going tonight.
The several states.
You are correct, Richard. He said, for those on the Zoom, the several states. The states have the power, the authority, and apparently a little bit of the will. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight is the Missouri versus Biden case. Because I think that we're seeing a roadmap being created to how the states can actually hold the government accountable through the court system, which means you're occasionally going to play judge roulette. If you get the wrong judge, it's a little hard, but the appeals process does work. And as I go through this case, you're going to see that there is some hope, and we can actually hold them accountable for some other things. So what is Missouri Biden all about? In October of 2023, impeccably credentialed epidemiologists Jayanta Bhattacharya from Stanford, Sunetra Gupta, and Martin Kulldorff of Stanford, Oxford, and Harvard gathered with a few journalists, writers, and economists to release what has become known as the Great Barrington Declaration. They were basically stating that the lockdowns do more harm than good, and that resources should be devoted to protecting the vulnerable rather than shutting down society. A lot of us felt that way, and the history has proven them correct, but they were silenced, and that's what this lawsuit is going to be all about. The declaration began circulating on social media and rapidly garnered signatures, including from other highly credentialed scientists. These guys are not conspiracy theorists. These are people that knew what they were talking about, and they were saying, you know, what the National Health Services are telling you, and you're experts, they were wrong, and we should be doing things differently. The declaration began circulating. Most mainstream news outlets and the scientists they chose to quote denounce the declaration in no uncertain terms. You know, we watch this. When contacted by reporters, Doctors Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins of the NIH publicly and vociferously repudiated the dangerous declaration, smearing the scientists, all generally considered to be at the top of their fields as fringe epidemiologists. These are some of the leaders in their field, and all of a sudden they know nothing because they disagree with what the administration or I don't want to say the administration because it was the Trump administration, it was the people working around it, it was the establishment were saying.
The administrative state.
The bureaucratic state, the deep state, whatever you want to call it. Over the next several months, these three scientists faced a barrage of condemnation. They were called eugenicists and anti-vaxxers. Emails obtained pursuant to a FOIA request later revealed that these attacks were not product of independent, objective news gathering process of the type of publications like the Times and the Guardian still like to advertise. Rather, they were the fruits of an aggressive attempt to shape the news by the same government officials whose policies they had been criticizing. It's a bit of an issue. You've got the press and government officials coordinating to shape a narrative with real life consequences. We found emails between Fauci and Collins revealed that the two officials had worked together with media outlets as various as Wired and The Nation to orchestrate a takedown of the Great Barrington Declaration. They wanted it silenced. The targeting of the scientists stopped with the bureaucrats they had implicitly criticized. Bhattacharya, Gupta, and Kulldorff soon learned that the declaration was being heavily censored on social media to prevent their scientific opinions from reaching the public. We'll get into the issues with that, but we all saw it happen in real time. These people were not allowed, very credentialed doctors. We weren't able to have a public debate. That's an issue, especially when we're talking about quote unquote the greatest pandemic of all time. We should have had these conversations. As would be revealed later in the Twitter files, which came in handy, these censorship efforts were not just limited to National Health Services, but rather was prevalent across the entire government. So what happens is these three gentlemen file a lawsuit. They are joined by the state of Missouri and the state of Louisiana. The Attorney General of Missouri was a guy by the name of Schmidt, who is now a U.S. Senator. And they filed suit to tell the federal government that's not okay. So who are the plaintiffs? We have the state of Missouri, the state of Louisiana, we have Bhattacharya, a few other doctors, including the ones I named. The plaintiffs that are named are Joseph R. Biden Jr., Karine Jean-Pierre, in her official capacity as the White House press secretary. That would later get changed to Jen Psaki, because she was the one who was actually doing most of this. And that's an interesting part of the story we're not really going to get into, but she's been fighting so hard not to be deposed.
Yeah, I love it.
She's going to lose. Vivek Murthy, who is in his capacity as a Surgeon General, Xavier Bechara as a Secretary of Human Health Services, and a few other people that we'll get into, Fauci, etc. This court case was ended up being filed in Louisiana. The U.S. District Judge there is a guy by the name of Terry Dowdy, and he is the hero of the story. This is a good judge, and we don't have, like I said, there's something called Judge Roulette. They got a good one. He's following the law the way it should be in both directions. I'll give you an example that one of the latest rulings, he basically said that of the like 9 or 10 different departments that he wants deposed, Joe Biden has now been excused because there's Supreme Court precedent that really nothing in this lawsuit can compel the office of the President of the United States to do or say anything. And I think he's correct on that. So Biden's off the hook on this, but his entire administration is not. A couple other people, yeah, Fauci was named, and so the court case, the initial filing, which happened in 2022, had a couple of the first 2 paragraphs are interesting, and I'll just read those to you verbatim. They started in 1783. George Washington warned that if the freedom of speech may be taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter. That was his address to the officers of the army in March 15, 1783. The freedom of speech in the United States now faces one of its greatest assaults by federal government officials in the nation's history. And that's how they opened their lawsuit. A private entity violates the First Amendment if the government coerces or induces it to take action the government itself would not be permitted to do, such as censor expression of a lawful viewpoint. They cite a court case, which is Biden versus Knight First Amendment, which is not the same Biden, but the government cannot accomplish, this is an important point, this is the core of the whole case. The government cannot accomplish through threats of adverse government action what the Constitution prohibits it from doing directly. You cannot use a third party to do, the government can't use a third party to do what it can't do.
They're good at it then.
Well, they've been doing it, but they can't. And that's what this case is all about. It's the biggest First Amendment case in the history of the country. Another great quote: the remedy for speech that is false speech, the remedy for speech that is false is speech that is true. This is the ordinary course in a free society. The response to the unreasoned is the rational, to the uninformed, the enlightened, and the solution to the straight out lie is the simple truth. Instead, they wanted to bury dissenting opinion, and that's not how a free society works. This is the government that is ruling over us. They don't want to let us speak. They don't want another opinion. They want to silence us and censor us, and they use big tech and the media to shut us up because we disagreed with their official narrative. So this court this case gets moved to the courts relatively quickly, and the judge, Mr. Dowdy, when he sees the evidence that starts showing up in discovery, it is so damning so quickly. And these are emails that are basically showing exactly what these people are alleging. Government officials are contacting Facebook or Meta, Twitter, you name it, all these companies, and they're saying basically, these people are disagreeing with this, it's dangerous, there's vaccine deniers, we need to shut them down. This is in their own writing. This shows up in discovery early on, and the judge makes a statement. I didn't bring all the quotes on this one. But he said, your case is so strong that you've already proven your case. You know, we could probably go straight to conviction, skip trial. It's almost what he said, but he's a good judge, stuff like that. But what he does is he grants what's called expedited discovery, which means you get to depose. Expedited discovery. We get to depose all of these government officials ASAP. You get to subpoena all of their emails. Oh, and my goodness, the treasure trove that's coming out for this. Oh, it is. I mean, this is not even. This is a shut and closed case. What these people did. In the expedited discovery that the judge granted, the government was already been cornered. They colluded with social media companies to silence Americans. The emails they were forced to prove, and that's in bold, that they did. And now the states want to expand the entire thing to even more agencies, because they were originally just going after the health agencies. Then they found out it was across government they were doing this. This isn't typical discovery that will proceed in the normal course. This is discovery on an expedited timetable due to the potential harm and to justify a temporary injunction, stopping the government from colluding with private entities to quench free speech. Or to say it another way, the judge is super concerned about the Biden administration engaging in fascism. Yes,
I
what-
saw today on the news. Sorry.
go ahead.
I saw him going to have the head in the court case with the American government, whatever branches they were, with TikTok, and they were asking them direct questions, and they're like, is it true that you're running for telling people trafficking with all the public, social media things, and just directly, and they were all just completely flustered,
Mhm.
couldn't get it together. And they're like, he just kept hammering them, and they were just crumbling under the pressure, and you could tell they were lying by the body language.
Well, of course they are.
Yeah, and it was interesting to watch.
Why haven't 25 more states piled on?
Yeah, that's my question.
Well, a few of them did join in the states, but these were the two leading ones. There was a few more. And part of that is because we're not electing the right state leaders. We need to be more involved with this. I think there's maybe one or two governors in this country that I would consider real constitutionalists. That's why I was such a big proponent of Carrie Lake, because
Yes.
that girl had big waivers.
She's going forward.
It is.
Trump's vice president.
I hope not.
I know.
Why is that?
So for the audience, someone said he hopes Carrie Lake becomes Trump's vice president. I'm still hoping Carrie Lake becomes the governor of Arizona. And a governor of a state has a lot more power than any vice president does. We need good governors. We need good attorney generals. We need good state legislatures. And that starts even further downstream. That's why we always talk about acting locally.
Should be more important than the president.
The governor should be. And in fact, once upon a time, it was considered that. Yeah.
That would be nice.
So on September 6th of last year, there was a memorandum that ruled on these disputes. Of course, the government's fighting this case. They're trying to slow walk it. They don't want their people to testify. They're doing everything they can. There's some funny claims they made, and this judge is Dowdy just keeps shutting them down. This court on September 6th granted plaintiffs' motion. Plaintiffs are the good guys. Defendants are the bad guys here. For expedited preliminary injunction related discovery and set an expedited discovery schedule. The discovery schedule required the parties to meet and confer in good faith about discovery disputes and to submit a joint statement to the court detailing the nature of the remaining disputes. The parties have done so. Government lawyers met with the plaintiffs and have submitted the pending joint statement on discovery disputes. The plaintiffs allege they have, through expedited discovery, obtained information that federal officials and agencies not named in the plaintiff's complaint and amended complaint have also engaged in communications. This is bringing in the other government agencies. And have also engaged in communications with social media platforms, as we've all witnessed in the Twitter files. But this case has got about 10 times more documents than the Twitter files ever did. About misinformation, disinformation, and censorship of quote unquote disfavored speech. These allegedly include the State Department, the FDA, the Census Bureau, the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, the U.S. Treasury Department, and the FBI. We're all involved in these. Yeah, this is basically a whole of government. This is the administrative state declaring war on our free speech. On March 2023, there's a ruling on, I may be getting ahead of myself, I may be misplaced sentence, I'll see here in a second. There's a ruling on the defendant's motion to strike plaintiff's proposed findings of fact. And I think I'm reading from that, but I'll tell you in a second. Yeah, these are the arguments for that. The defendants are arguing that the First Amendment does not protect government speech. Plaintiffs correctly respond that the question here is whether the states have suffered an injury in fact under Article 3, not whether they have suffered a violation of the First Amendment. That's a really interesting legal question. I can get into that in the Q&A stuff at the end of this. That's really the core of this case. Sure, there was censorship, but was there harm done? Can you prove that there was harm done? But well, the states have to prove standing because they sued, and then these individual defendants, these doctors, have to be able to prove standing because they were harmed, and they're both have proven their standing. And it's interesting, and the law behind both of these arguments are very, very strong. And this judge did his homework, and I can't go through all of it because we don't have till midnight. Because the court finds that the states have adequately alleged injury in fact under a theory of what's called parens patriae, standing, a theory of injury to sovereign interests, and a theory of direct injury, the court will not address the state's arguments as to their interest in the following the free discourse of their citizens. What the judge is basically saying here is the states have already proven they have standing. They have shown harm. The censorship and the lack of free information kept the state of Missouri and Louisiana and the other adjoining states from being able to exercise their own obligations to their own people. There wasn't free information. Their own health departments are being told one thing which isn't true. They didn't have all the information to actually do the business of government in a proper way. That's the argument being made here, and it's a very strong argument because it happened. The defendants then argued that the private plaintiffs cannot establish an injury in fact because the complaint of injury involves social media content moderation in the past. Saying, oh, okay, we censored you in the past, and okay, sorry, no harm. You can't really prove monetary harm, although they can. And then these plaintiffs, these doctors, have got to prove that not only did you injure us in the past, you're doing it right now, and you're going to be doing it in the future. That's very provable, and that's a big part of the case. So try not to get too deep in the legalese, but these are constitutional questions. It's important, and they make it's just common sense. If you're being censored, you've lost your ability. Some of these people lost jobs. Their income got reduced. Everything like that. There is actual harm. The government's trying to say, oh, sorry, no harm, no foul. That's a BS argument. Each of the private plaintiffs allege past, ongoing, and expected future censorship injuries. Their allegations are more than complaints of past wrongs. Further, plaintiffs easily satisfy the substantial risk standard. The threat of future censorship is substantial, and the history of past censorship is strong evidence that the threat of future censorship is not illusory or merely speculative. Plaintiffs' request for an injunction does not merely seek to redress the initial imposition of their censorship penalties, but rather their continued maintenance and enforcement. Accordingly, the court finds that private plaintiffs have satisfied Article 3's injury in fact requirement. So the judge is making a very strong case that we're not going to have any standing issues in this case, because this is going to get appealed at some point, but he's nailed this one. There's some emails just to show you how bad the censorship was. I'll walk you through what some of these emails talked about. What were these government officials doing with these private entities, Twitter, Facebook, etc. Show of hands, has anybody read the Twitter files? Okay, basically, when Elon Musk bought Twitter, he realized that there's something amiss, and he starts getting a hold of all these internal communications, and he got a few journalists from different walks of life, including Matt Taibbi and others, to go through different versions of the Twitter files and review the communications of the government and Twitter. Okay, and what this is revealing is a massive amount of censorship, not just government entities, but NGOs, different non-government organizations, and other little entities and think tanks are sending Twitter and Facebook and all the other social media companies, you need to censor these people because we don't like what they're saying. They're going to make people vaccine hesitant. Raise your hand if you're vaccine hesitant. But all that stuff, that's what was going on, throughout 2020, 2021, 22, and still to this very day. It has not stopped.
I'm sure they'll have another thing coming down the pipe they're making up, and then they'll have
the fungus.
Oh, I just read about that.
And there's always something else.
They'll have to do something a little different because everybody's going to be skeptical if there's another coronavirus or something.
I hope so.
How many people wish they would have fought back and didn't? I'd say that 10 times the number of people who actually vote.
I hope you're correct, but my faith in humanity's backbone. You know, we're not the same people that fought a revolutionary war in 1776. There are not enough real warriors, men, and patriots as we had then.
And it's this exact crap that it makes people scared to have backbone.
Of course it is. That's part of the point.
Lions or sheep, though, you grab one or you get flat.
That's the whole reason we do this stuff.
I know. It's fine.
So one of the heroes of this story, I say heroes with air quotes, is a guy by the name of Rob Flaherty. He was the White House, he still is, the White House Director of Digital Media. This is the censorship czar. I'm going to read just a few of the emails he was sending out to different social media companies. You tell me if this is coercion or not. Quote, "You are hiding the ball." And he linked to a Washington Post article about Facebook's own research into the spread of ideas that contribute to vaccine hesitancy. "I think there's a misunderstanding. I don't think this is a misunderstanding," he says back. "We are gravely concerned that your service is one of the top drivers of vaccine hesitancy." He's saying this to Facebook.
Oh.
Period. "We want to know that you're trying. We want to know we can help, how we can help. We want to know that you're not playing a shell game." You know, he's berating executives at Facebook. "This would be a lot easier if you would just be straight with us." Now, it's pretty harsh language. You actually think about this. This is a government that has shown no qualms about using the force of government to attack private businesses. This has been done. We've seen it. And they are sitting there telling some of the most powerful multinational corporations in the world, "We don't like your behavior."
And they had to be that harsh with a company that was already very left wing and was probably not that hesitant.
They don't think they don't think that companies like Facebook, Twitter censored enough.
I know.
And we know I mean, some of us lost accounts on all these different platforms. They said, "Yeah, you didn't banish enough people." You know, they wanted us all shut down. It's unprecedented in the United States of America, this level of censorship. Mr. Flaherty demanded to know what Facebook was doing to quote unquote limit the spread of viral content on WhatsApp, especially given its reach in immigrant communities and communities of color. Always got to throw that in there. The company responded 3 weeks later with a lengthy list of promises that they would make to keep the White House off their case. Another real fun one is President Biden, his press secretary, Jen Psaki, and Surgeon. Oh, here's some of the other people who got named in the second level of discovery. Well, the initial people that were named, you know, mostly the National Health Service people like Fauci and Collins. And through the discovery process of the early lawsuit, they discovered that this was much broader than originally thought. And it'll get interesting here. Biden, Psaki, and Surgeon General Vivek Murthy later publicly vowed to hold the platforms accountable. He said this in public: "We will hold these social media platforms accountable if they didn't heighten censorship." On July 16, 2021, a reporter asked Mr. Biden his message to platforms like Facebook. He replied, "They're killing people." You guys remember that? Okay. Mr. Biden later claimed he meant users, not platforms, were killing people. But the record shows Facebook itself was the target of the White House's presser campaign. All of them were. And a government shouldn't be doing that, period, not in a free society. So that's really the gist of where the lawsuit's at right now. We have massive discovery. The government's fighting back, trying to, I'll give you a great example. And these are fair judicial questions, so this is reasonable. If you can get the information you need for your lawsuit from an underling, do you really need to subpoena the chief of department? And the answer is no. So a lot of these underlings are being brought in for testimony, but it's really not going to matter because the amount of evidence showing what the government did is so overwhelming. You know, they're just trying to avoid certain muckety mucks at the top having to actually give testimony. The Jen Psaki case is really interesting because she no longer works for the government, yet the government is representing her.
Oh.
Yeah, that's not allowed. The Department of Justice is fighting back against this one to keep her.
They're fighting against the government helping her.
The Department of Justice is trying to keep her from having to testify.
Oh.
That's
for protecting her.
She was
They're
directly,
protecting
her
her.
job was to talk to the American people.
Yeah, and what she
Very
said, and
exactly
she was
why.
pushing censorship. She was coercing, thank you. She was coercing, these private companies into acting in the government's, on the government's behalf to silence political or, thought that this dissent. You can't do that.
So if she's being sued for her actions while she was a government official or an employee of the government, isn't that proper for government attorneys to represent her? Because she's
In this case, no. In this case, no, it really isn't. Basically, they're trying to say that, well, they originally named Corinne Jean-Pierre, but she wasn't the one doing this, it's censorship. She wasn't the one who committed the acts. Jen Psaki does. She needs to represent herself. Yeah, I can get your question. I get your
If
question.
she were still employed with government,
Absolutely would be proper. That's different. So what's going on now is an awful lot of discovery and depositions are happening very fast and very furiously. And there's a lot of stuff coming out, and there's like I said, one of the two attorneys generals who started this was Eric Schmidt, who now got elected to the US Senate. And so we're kind of worried that the Missouri side of the lawsuit may dwindle a little bit. And his successor, I believe the name is Davis, and I should have written it down, is doing a really good job. So this case is going forward.
So if they can get enough just judges together, like the one that you mentioned in Louisiana, these people actually start being incarcerated for their crimes.
Well, we'll get there. What are the actual penalties for this? And so when you file a lawsuit, you ask for a remedy. Okay. So what's the remedy to keep the government from doing this? I mean, are you going to sue the government? Look, the private individuals, these doctors are they will probably have a follow-up case once this is decided in court, and they will probably get some money.
They're just gonna get our money.
Well, sure. So, yeah, it's our money, but so are these people going to be held accountable? Well, what is the relief sought? And this lawsuit is really simple: cease and desist. Period. Knock it off. That's what these lawsuits asked for.
How does that stop them from doing it tomorrow?
Well, it does. First of all, it's the exposure. And there's probably going to be a little bit more on the penalty side that comes down. But the idea in a free society is the more people wake up to the fact that we have a government that is not following the rules of free society, they need to knock it off. And if you need to stop electing the people that do this sort of thing. And this is how Congress has ammunition to actually put real reforms in place to make this not happen anymore. You're not going to see any of these people getting depositions being led away in chains, but it's still.
It should. It never happens.
that's the best way to deter it from happening going forward.
Yeah.
Just suing the government, like says taxpayers end up putting the bill, nothing, So, I mean, you have to incarcerate people who committed this crime.
Yeah, but there's no statute on the books that says, let's say the government just flat out says, Richard, I'm taking away your First Amendment rights, as opposed to using a third party. There's no statute for that government official to go to jail for doing so. He should be fired. He should be shamed. Should never work in decent society again. And that's what should happen.
But if they can prove that it did harm to citizens, wouldn't that be actually physical or mental?
It's the precedent. It's the precedent that's being set, and this is going to aid so many of the other lawsuits that are going on everywhere. I mean, from David Martin on down. Once this stuff is established as in the judicial record that our government lied, coerced, and did all this other things to
They
us,
still are.
and they're still doing.
I'm very concerned when I went to a doctor last week, and the specialist, and I said, tell me, and he said, we call it, since COVID, what we thanks to is, they do a good job, but they are limited, it's called, we call it corporate medicine. He says, oh yeah, he says, if I say anything outside of the protocol against the CDC, they'll come down and take my license.
Right.
Now that is frightening, because the medical profession, as they were trained, are not allowed to practice.
Yes.
And they're breaking their Hippocratic oath.
Yes, and they are, could be causing life and death. That's,
Well, that's why this case is so important, because it's going to put on the record. Now, here's an interesting question, because it's pretty clear that when this goes to trial after all this discovery, who's gonna win. I mean, it's really black and white. The government's grasping for straws, and the plaintiffs have got one of the strongest cases I've ever seen. I laid it out a little bit for you. I mean, I could talk like 5 hours for all the examples of what these people did. Will the government appeal?
Of course.
No, maybe not. They may not appeal. You know why? Because that's more exposure.
Right.
If this thing gets to the Supreme Court, now we've got some real penalties. Because Supreme Court, because unfortunately Marbury versus Madison is still in effect, they can actually write law from the bench, and you might see something very interesting. So I don't think the government's going to appeal this. I think they're going to lick their wounds and try to sweep it under the rug. But this is still such a huge case, and it's going to happen soon. This deposition has happened very fast. There's an appeals court sitting above this judge, and he's dotting every I and crossing every T. He's making sure that this is not overturned. Yeah, Judge Dowdy is.
But at any time, the government could just decide, just throw up their hands and say you win. I mean, if it comes to Psaki getting dragged in front of the judge,
so
there's no way out.
They would basically, the government would be admitting that yes, we did a bunch of stuff we're not allowed to do.
Right.
And the obvious question is, okay, so are you going to hold the people who did so accountable? Who gave the order? Who gave the direction? You know, all that sort of stuff that has to be answered. You know, if we had a responsible media that asked real questions, this would be the leading story. But it will be. This is too big from a
And
constitution.
nobody's covering.
I am.
Well, right.
If there's no statute for violating the First Amendment, would this be a RICO prosecution?
It's a good
Could
question.
it be a racketeering? I mean, it sounds like racketeering.
Well, they are in the cartel human trafficking.
Well, but I mean, there are a lot of organizations that are working together and that sounds like racketeering.
Question for the Zoom and the recording is this not a RICO case? I don't know. It's outside my area of expertise. I'm not a lawyer. So you maybe.
Another question, since this has resulted in what I would consider the mass murder of massive amounts of people out of false information, misinformed, but that's considered mass murder, like if somebody from like Columbine or whatever does mass murder, they go to that big house.
Okay. So which institution in America or anywhere in the world has the authority and the will to bring that case forward? And no, and this is why this is beautiful, and this is why I led with the preface with this comment. What is the institution that has the ability to do that? What's the states? And and Missouri v. Biden has shown you the roadmap of how you can use the court system to hold the government accountable. Because FOIA requests work, you get that information. We can, I mean, our government's been up to more malfeasance than just this.
So
This is the roadmap to hold everybody accountable if this goes through. This is why that's so important.
So is this dominoes?
It could be.
Hopefully.
That's the hope.
Hopefully.
The hope is that this sets a precedent of how you can hold the federal government responsible, accountable for their actions that are not constitutional. The federal government's never going to hold itself accountable. You know, this behemoth, behemoth, or whatever, how you would pronounce that. Thank you. The Leviathan, that's the word I was looking for. This Leviathan isn't going to bring its scale, reign in its own power. It's just not going to happen. That's not what central governments do. But our Constitution is still intact to some degree, and the states still have that authority. And the court systems aren't totally broken yet. There are still some good justices out there and some good lawyers. And this is how we beat the system back. And it's always been about state rights. And when the states reassert their sovereignty and take it back from the government, going back to the very introduction to the Constitution is a contract between the states and a new entity they were forming called the central government that had very specific enumerated powers, and the central government kept taking more and more. And I like to use the example of the pie. All government power is in one pie. And we decided to carve out a couple slices for the federal government, and those were handling international affairs and settling interstate disputes. Well, they decided to take a whole lot more, and it's time for us to take our pie back. And that is how this country is saved peacefully. Yes,
So when you say that the depositions are gonna be soon, are you?
they're ongoing.
Okay, so it's ongoing.
Yeah, January 6th, a bunch of them were dumped, and to their credit, the lawyers for Missouri and Louisiana are releasing them publicly. We can see all this fact finding they're getting. You know, and it's incriminating as all heck. This is the first story I look up every single day. Yeah, it's,
Who is they? Is it just a human element, that small piece of pie? Just human nature, human greed? Who is they?
so the question for the Zim is who is they? Who is that is taking all of our pie and all of our powers? I wasn't gonna go there tonight, but it's one of my favorite topics.
Sure, it's a loaded question.
But
No, our world, no, the world has been ruled by a ruling class, oligarchies, multinational corporations, what have you, going back several thousand years into the Roman days.
Yep,
Some of these families are still intact from 2,000 years ago. Some of them are new. The Rockefellers came to prominence in the late 1800s, and they are sitting yet, and they're definitely sitting at the big boy table. So this is a global Game of Thrones. A guy by the name of David, God, it's not my Scott. I'm gonna forget his name again. I always do that when I'm up here. Gentleman who spent about 30 years working for Kissinger, so he knows what he's talking about. Wrote a couple of books that I've read. David Rothkopf, and he's definitely not someone who I agree with politically, but he knows what he's talking about. He describes the way the global Game of Thrones is run is about 6,000 oligarchical families around the world, and these are the people who are above the law. These are the people who sit above the government. These are the puppet masters. They've got, these are the ones who plotted out the Great Reset, and they've been doing this. They tried to do it in 1919 with the League of Nations. They tried to do it in 1949 with the United Nations. They've been trying to do this. They're eugenicists. They are Malthusians. These people think part of the entire concept of this crony capitalist mercantilist system is that the world has limited resources. They think they have divine right. They're better than us. They always have. And they want the resources for themselves, and they think we're the useless eaters. That's why you have all these depopulation concepts going out there, and all of the thinkers that they've sponsored going back for the last couple centuries, from Malthus to Marx to Darwin. I can name, I'm going with dozens of these names of these people that espouse these ideas in the hallowed halls of academia. What are our universities? Who funds the universities? Well, it's the same people. They're endowments, and people give the money to their endowments. They're going to teach they want the universities to teach people these same concepts. This is how they create their Praetorian Guard. This is the real deep state, is the bureaucratic state, the people who work in government. You go to school at one of these, 6 or 7 Ivy League colleges. You go to Georgetown, major in poli-sci. You're the ones who are getting the internships in DC. You're going to step into working for a senator or a congressman, what have you. This is how these are the people who actually run the government. These are the bureaucrats. They've been indoctrinated from day one. They play the game. The rest of us, we're useless eaters, according to them.
it's like, they say it's like we mentioned the Fourth Reich is what it's called.
It's absolutely.
It's called Klaus, and he prides himself on.
Klaus Schwab.
Klaus Schwab, yeah.
You know what? You know who else was a Kissinger and a Rockefeller puppet? Klaus Schwab.
Yeah.
And Maurice Strong was the fifth of I call him the 5 horsemen of Rockefeller from 1971. Maurice Strong, and if you don't know that name, you should, because he's the one that basically was the captain of the ship of the entire United Nations global warming push for the last 50 years. Yeah, that's Maurice Strong, Canadian oil man, by the way. Made his money in fossil fuels. Yeah, really good mover deal. But so I hope that answered your question about who are they.
Yeah, but it's the same people that America was founded against.
Correct.
100%. Yeah, we moved this country to get away from the mercantilist system of government, and it followed us. And people like Hamilton, and then Lincoln, and pretty much everyone since Lincoln, we created a national government that was completely reliant on. There's a few concepts this mercantilist idea has in common throughout the centuries. They want protective tariffs. Who are they protecting? Well, the favored corporations. They want internal improvements. When they say that, what they mean is they want government to sponsor works that they give out money to their favorite corporations, no bid contracts for the government. Back in 1776, when Hamilton's day, 1791, this is building roads and canals, and in Lincoln's day, this is building railroads. Well, that's some of the most corrupt business ever done in America, and it created robber barons and incredible disparity of wealth. The funny thing is, the Transcontinental Railroad, there were 2. We only hear about the one that Lincoln sponsored, the one that zigzagged to whatever politician he favored. So it wasn't in a straight line. You get a lot of money if the railroad goes to your town. So these politicians favor that. Well, that one went way over budget and took twice as long to build as it was supposed to. And the other railroad was built by private interests, went from Minnesota to, I think it was either Seattle or Portland, and got done in half the time and under cost. And so there were two transcontinental railroads, but nobody talks about that. That's how the robber barons were built. It was about being crony capitalists, being close to government. And what you're going to do, if you're one of these people, this type of businessman, is you're going to make sure you put politicians in place that are going to basically favor your business interests. But more importantly, this is how cartels work. This is a giant cartel system. The cartel exists for two reasons. To maximize your profit, but more importantly, to eliminate your competition. And they're going to put politicians in place that create big regulation. And you're seeing a regulatory burden makes it very hard for small startups to get involved in business. While the established people that can afford the lawyers and own the politicians, they know exactly how to navigate the regulatory grid. And that's what American business has been for all of our lives and before. This is what the banking system is. We're seeing this with the regulatory capture. People go in and out. Right now, there's a coup going on in our banking system. The major too big to fail banks from 2008 and 9 are gathering assets from all the mid-sized regional banks because everyone's afraid that the mid-sized regional banks, don't have enough capital to be able to pay off their depositors. Well, maybe we ought to take a step back and get rid of fractional reserve banking in the first place, but that's neither here nor there. More importantly, the big run on the bank up in Silicon Valley Bank, and I talked about this last week, started from two sources. Peter Thiel and some of his other Silicon Valley buddies said, okay, there's a problem here. We'll get our money out. More importantly, JP Morgan's private banker started poaching Silicon Valley Bank's clients. There was a one-day run on a bank and they found themselves, I don't have enough cash to deal with deposits tomorrow. Got shut down overnight. If a proper regulatory environment was in place, and that is doable, you're not going to have this. It's going to be a level playing field. They also, with all this overregulation, you create a need for much more bureaucracy, and that means government officials. So if let's say you get out of college, you're 21 years old, you go to work for the government for 30 years and retire for 40 years, you just spent 70 years as a welfare recipient and probably added nothing of value to the government, to society whatsoever.
Yep.
Our Social Security is not guaranteed. It was put off into a separate account. Okay. Government pensions are guaranteed. Funny how that works. You want to know what these government employees that are lifelong welfare recipients, do you know how they vote? They vote for the establishment. Anything that's going to make the state bigger, and that's establishment Republicans and Democrats. This is about raping the middle class. That's what this is all about. It's what it's always been about. Taking a step back, I'll just conclude with this. I call what's going on today, I call it as Gutenberg 2.0. And I've talked about this before, but I'll repeat it. So throughout history, before like the 1400s, kings, the nobles, everyone like that, had the monopoly on information, or the church. The Catholic Church had that. Now most people were literate, and what you knew about the Bible is what the Catholic Church told you. That was it. So all of a sudden in the 1400s, Gutenberg comes up with the printing press, and the most published book of all time, the Bible, starts getting distributed all over the land, and people could read the Bible for themselves. And we started having breakaway churches, and you also had newspapers and pamphlets. So before that, I didn't know what someone 10 miles away and the hamlet 10 miles away was up to, because there's no way to communicate. Well, now we have newspapers and people could talk and exchange ideas. This is a good thing. And out of that, from the printing press, the rulers of the realm lost their monopoly on information. And we got the Reformation and the Renaissance. And these great thinkers like Montesquieu and John Locke and all the others inspired people like the founding fathers to say there's a better way of doing things. Well, the ruling class doesn't like that. They lost their power. We created this incredible idea of freedom, liberty in the middle class because of 1776 and the Reformation and the breakaway churches had a ton to do with this. And this nation was founded on Christian values and to a great degree. It all ties in together. Well, the rulers of the realm, the masters of the universe, don't like losing their power. They always wanted to go back to a feudalist society where there's the rulers and serfs, so we don't take their resources. So in the late 1800s, once the robber barons, once Lincoln is taken us away from being a constitutional republic and there were state rights. We're now national government. We get these robber barons, this incredible disparity of wealth, whether it be J.P. Morgan, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, all these incredible robber barons. And, I won't even go into all the political corruption that went on up to the 1890s. They started buying up, these mega wealthy people started buying up all the newspapers. The way they could influence public opinion and the public discourse. And they were basically sponsoring all the universities where free thought's supposed to happen. Now that they started taking that away. This leads us up into the 20th century. And then we get the radio, which, the rich multinational corporations had a monopoly on from day one. And then television, which they had a monopoly on from day one. They're the ones who taught what, they shaped history, taught what our kids are learning in school. What all of us learned in school was not real history. Whether it be public school all the way up to universities. And the longer you're in the university, the more indoctrinated you are to some degree. Then along comes the internet, and that should have been the ultimate control mechanism, but they lost control. And I will posit for you today that despite unprecedented censorship of the internet that we've seen the last 3 years, and total control over these mega, huge corporate, big technological companies, they've lost control. Because we're here today, and I talk to people all over the world, and more people are waking up every single day, and every single decent poll shows that more and more people recognize that, oh, there may have been an issue with the election in 2020. There may be an issue that the FBI was involved in January 6th. I mean, all of this stuff is now coming out because I think we've gotten past it. So what I call the internet is Gutenberg 2.0, because we have free information, and that's how we win this. It's a cultural war, it's an information war, it's an education war. We have these conversations, we take what we learn, we share them with other people.
And the Missouri versus Biden is going to do just as much damage to Facebook and Twitter and all those guys did as to the government.
100%.
Because they're all in them.
Well, yeah, it's interesting if you go to the Twitter files that some of the Twitter execs actually pushed back against the government a little bit, saying, are you guys insane? We can't do that. Mm-hmm. There is some of that. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, we're going to probably end up with a more free society and more exchange of ideas. And that's a good thing. That's how we win, is to actually talk to people as opposed to having one ideology handed down from on high. That's it for that presentation.